Gang, I've been riding motorcycles for over 40 years, but recently, a 776cc Suzuki taught me that I've been getting some things wrong. Not like dangerously wrong, but like lazily wrong. And depending on the day, that might actually be worse. You know, I've done videos in the past on dangerous riding habits, common mistakes, things you should practice, the stuff that probably doesn't get talked about nearly enough. And I don't mean common sense stuff like don't run a red light. I mean the stuff that lives in that gap between what you know you should do and what you actually do when you're tired or distracted or get too comfortable. But this episode is a slightly different flavor. See, my son's Suzuki GSX-8S has been sitting in my garage for a couple of weeks now. So of course, I've been riding it. How could I not? I'm a curious lifelong cruiser guy, so naturally I want to see what the other side of the showroom floor actually looks like. Now I want to say this up front because this subject isn't necessarily sport bike specific. If you've been on the same style of motorcycle for a long time and you're not regularly challenging yourself on different roads under different conditions, some of these things might be living in your riding style right now. See, here's what I didn't expect, that this bike would become a diagnostic tool because it's fundamentally different from anything I'm used to. It's lighter, it's more responsive, quicker to reflect your inputs. It serviced habits that I've been carrying around for years that my cruiser was quietly covering for. 5 very specific habits, and I'm going to walk you through all of them. Habit number 1 is sloppy line entry. And here's what I mean by that. On a heavy cruiser, especially a big V-twin, you can enter a corner a beat late from slightly the wrong position in the lane, with your arc already slightly off, and the mass of that motorcycle will carry you through. The momentum stabilizes the line, and you're probably cruising leisurely enough that you can correct that imprecision at the entry. And 99 times out of 100, you make it through just fine. So your brain logs that as something you did correctly. But on a 430-pound naked bike with this thing's power-weight ratio, that same imprecise entry doesn't always quietly fix itself. It asks you questions, and you better have answers. I kept entering corners from positions that worked fine on my cruiser, and then the GSX-8S kept reminding me, politely but clearly, that I was arriving late to a conversation I should have started earlier. Good line entry starts before you think it does. It starts with your speed entering the corner, your lane position before the turn, and where your eyes are. On a heavy cruiser, you got some grace on all 3 of those things. But on a lighter, more responsive bike, going quicker, yeah, it charges you a toll for every one of those careless decisions. The dangerous version of this habit isn't the everyday twisty run you've done 100 times. It's the corner you didn't see coming on an unfamiliar road that suddenly tightens mid-arc. If sloppy line entry is baked into your riding habits because your bike typically forgives it, that's when the forgiveness runs out. And the fix isn't complicated. It's earlier eyes, earlier speed reduction, and earlier lane position commitment. But you have to want to fix it. And a lot of us heavy cruiser riders don't even know the bad habit is there because our bike never told us so. Habit number 2 is more nuanced counter steering. Now, before I lose anybody here, counter steering is just the physics of how motorcycles actually turn at speed. You press forward on the right bar, the bike leans right, you turn right. It's a law of physics that you either work with consciously or you drift into it accidentally. Most experienced riders counter steer without even thinking about it, which is fine, until that thinking part matters. If you transition from a heavy touring bike over to a sport bike, you might think that steering is going to be exactly the same, because they're both motorcycles, right? It isn't. While the basic principles of counter steering do apply to both, how you use it on a sport bike is the difference between carving a perfect line and crashing. On a heavy touring bike, counter steering requires muscle. You're fighting a raked out fork, a long wheelbase, and an 800-pound land yacht. You have wide handlebars for leverage, and you have to plan your turn early because the bike takes a moment to react. On a sport bike, counter steering is pure reflex. The aggressive, steep steering geometry means the bike's actively waiting to fall into a corner. Even the tiniest nudge on the bars drops the bike into a lean instantly. If you try to muscle a sport bike the way you muscle a heavy bagger, you will dangerously oversteer. And sport bikes demand precise lean angles to keep the tire's contact patch glued to the road. Counter steering places the bike exactly where it needs to be for maximum traction. Touring bikes require a deliberate forceful command to turn. Sport bikes require a high-speed conversation of more subtle but more precise inputs. You gotta treat the sport bike with a bit more finesse. Let the geometry do most of the work. A couple of weeks on this naked bike put that sharpness back into my riding. Not because I was riding all that much faster, but because there was no slack in it. Habit number 3 is outdated brake calibration. And I'm going to explain what I mean carefully on this one because it sounds scarier than it is. But in the moments when it matters, it really matters. Every experienced rider carries an internal calibration in their head for stopping distance. You know, on your bike, under your typical riding conditions, roughly how much road you need. It's not math, it's a feel. It's learned repetition and instinct. You could call it experience, but experience on your bike. And it might be built up over years. The problem is that calibration has been tuned to the bike that you've been riding. Its weight, its braking character, the feel of its lever at speed. This GSX-8S, for example, weighs close to 400 pounds less than my loaded touring cruiser. The front brake on a bike this light is a completely different instrument. It stops much faster for the same amount of input. The first time I really needed the front brake in a meaningful way on this thing, I had a half-second of recalibration that I did not enjoy. And side note, another thing I had to get used to was the strong engine braking. On my big old cruiser, if you're doing even slightly spirited riding, let's just say braking coming into corners is just a given. But on this bike, I can just about engine brake through all but the most aggressive of cornering situations. And here's the thing about that mental brake calibration. Most riders only truly stress test that when something goes horribly wrong. A car pulls out in front of you. A light changes faster than expected. And in that moment, you're not running calculations, you're running muscle memory. If your muscle memory is tuned to 850 pounds and you're currently riding something 430, or the reverse, maybe you're attuned to a lighter bike and riding on something much heavier. Your first hard brake application from muscle memory may not match what that bike needs. If you underbrake, you're gonna arrive at the problem faster than expected. If you overbrake, especially on a lighter bike with good front brakes, worst case scenario, you could lose the front end. And the fix is easy, but it is deliberate. When you get on any bike that's meaningfully different from the one you usually ride, heavier, lighter, different brake feel, find an empty parking lot. Do 5 hard stops on purpose before you need them for real. I know most of us won't do this. I didn't do it my first day on the GSX-8S, and it reminded me why it matters. Habit number 4, sitting on the bike instead of riding it. And this is the one that's hardest to explain without sounding like I'm telling you you're doing it wrong. So let me start it off this way. There is nothing wrong with how a cruiser is designed to be ridden. The whole point of that geometry is comfort, stability, low fatigue for lots of miles. That's not a flaw, but there is a difference between riding a motorcycle and just sitting on one. Sometimes long-term cruiser riders, including me, can slowly drift toward the latter without even ever noticing it. When everything about the bike's designed to support you, like forward foot position, maybe floorboards, weight distributed back, low seat height, maybe even a driver backrest. Sometimes you stop actively managing your weight. You stop using your body as part of how the bike behaves, because you don't have to. The cruiser handles it. A naked sport bike, on the other hand, puts your weight forward, more over the front wheel, pegs directly underneath you, nothing supporting you from behind. And what that means in practical terms is your body's constantly involved. Weight to the inside of the corner, squeezing the tank with your knees when necessary, loading the outside peg. Your body is an active participant in what the bike is doing, not just a passenger. It didn't take much time on a naked before I started to remember what that felt like. But it was like waking up a set of riding instincts that had been in a long hibernation. And here's why this matters. An active riding position gives you more options. When something unexpected happens, an active body in motion responds faster than a body that was at rest. Think of it this way. You ever watch a really good fighter versus a newer, inexperienced one? The new guy has his hands down when nothing's happening. But the seasoned guy keeps his hands up all the time, even between exchanges. Not because something's about to happen, because staying active costs less than recovering from being passive. Same principle on a bike. A rider who's actively managing his weight through a corner has options that a passive rider doesn't. Now, I'm not saying get uncomfortable on your cruiser. I'm just saying consider whether or not your body is still part of that conversation, or whether it's just along for the ride. And habit number 5 is relying way too much on the luxury of torque. This one is the most cruiser-specific thing on this list. And if you've been riding with a big torque motor for a long time, V-twin, big boxer, you probably know exactly what I'm about to say. We have learned to solve problems with torque. Corner a little bit too wide, drive out of it. Speed drop too much mid-curve, crack it open and let that torque pull you through. And on a bike with an enormous torque curve and the stability to match, this often works. It's not technically correct, but it works. And bikes that are forgiving of it let you keep doing it for years without consequences. The GSX-8S has a lively parallel twin that makes 83 horsepower for only 430 pounds. It's not short on power, but it is short on the kind of low RPM, fat torque forgiveness that a big V-twin delivers. You can't crack the throttle mid-corner in any gear on this bike the same way you can on a cruiser and expect the same outcome. The power arrives faster in higher RPMs, and the consequences of a sloppy throttle in a corner are more immediate. What that meant for me was I had to think about corner entry speed more carefully again, because the torque will fix it mentality just wasn't going to work for me anymore. I had to be at the right speed before the corner, not hoping to negotiate it on the way through. And here's an honest confession. I kind of forgot what that discipline felt like. Not because I ride reckless, but because I ride a tool that compensates for that and let those skills go soft. The principle here is simple. Understand what you're asking your motor to fix and whether or not it's capable of fixing it on any bike. All right, 5 habits: sloppy line entry, passive counter steering, outdated brake calibration, sitting instead of riding, and using torque as an exit strategy. None of these are going to get you in trouble on a leisurely afternoon cruise, but something to consider when you jump on a less familiar bike, especially when you start pushing hard. Look, riding for any number of years does not mean that you've been practicing for all of those years. It just means that you've been comfortable. And comfortable is great, right up until the moment the road throws you something your old skills aren't quite ready for. And riding a different machine is one of the fastest ways to figure out where those gaps live. So what might be a complacent habit living in your riding style right now? One that might reveal itself the minute you jump on an unfamiliar bike. Is it any of these 5? Because I gotta tell you, for me, it was every single one of them. Anyway, that's all I got for you today. So in the meantime, ride hard, stay salty, and we'll see you in the next one.